Yo, what's good, legends? It's your boy Chronos. Back at it again with What If Deku Had Cell's Abilities Part 4. You already know, things are heating up, and I'm bringing even more action this time around. Huge shout out to the one and only Big Teddy G3498 for making this collab happen. I want to thank each and every one of you for your amazing support. You guys are the real MVPs. Now, let's dive straight in and see how Deku's evolution continues to change the game. Sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Chapter 22. Not in Hosu. After the shark meal cooked by the cafeteria staff, Izuku went to his room to sleep. He turned on his phone again to see dozens of messages and missed calls, mostly from Nem and Mina. He only had a few from Shinso and the others. Shinso gave up on trying to contact him and just sent him a nice job sticker in his messages. He was going to respond to Mina through a message when another call came in from Nem. Nem. That is all he got out. Izuku, I swear I will lock you in your room when you get back if you turn off your phone again, she said through clenched teeth. She let out a sigh and continued more calmly. I know you like to hunt. Just be careful. Okay, I will, Izuku said, chastised. Good. How was your day? She asked more normally now. Great. I got to stop 2 thugs. Gang called it a mugging. One tried to run, but I hunted him down. It was fun. Izuku switched and said cheerily, That's great. I'm glad you are learning while you're out there. Izuku could hear her smile from his end. He beamed in pride. Gang also taught me how to use my presence. That thing that animal quirks people get scared from. They talked for a bit longer, and Nem let Izuku rest for the night. He was happy to hear from her again and did feel somewhat bad when he shut them out because the phone didn't stop making noise. He messaged Mina, and they chatted for a bit before Mina had to go to sleep for the next day. Izuku followed suit and curled up on the tatami mat with a blanket. The next day, Izuku woke up the same as always and flexed his whole body to start the day. He sat up and looked around. He picked up his newest trophy and admired it. That also reminded him that he needed to fix his arm where the shark bit into him. His flesh and muscles pulled back right above his elbow and saw the jagged teeth indents left by the shark. He focused on filling in and closing the teeth marks. While it wasn't a detriment to his efficiency, he liked to be as best as he could be. Once done, he changed into his hero suit and met up with Gang Orca for some sparring. Izuku and Gang Orca walked the streets of the city. The feral boy happily walked along with his mentor and observed everything there was to see. Civilians gave Izuku a smile in return as they passed him and Gang Orca a wave. Gang Orca stopped and touched his ear, listening to something on his earpiece. Izuku stopped and waited for Gang Orca to finish. When he did, he looked around and found a street. He motioned for Izuku to follow. The hero began to run with Izuku by his side and kept up without much effort. There was a car crash and we've been called to help. Being a hero doesn't just mean protecting others from crime, but also helping others in situations like this. Maybe we need to help in fire and help get people out, or something as simple as helping a child find their parent in a crowd. Gang Orca explained as they ran and got closer to the sound of sirens. Izuku nodded and took in all the information. How are we going to help here? Not sure yet, but we'll see when we arrive, the hero said, and they sped up. They arrived at the scene, and Gang Orca went to a few civilians trying to pry a car door open with a man passed out behind the steering wheel. Izuku followed, and the people moved aside for the heroes. Gang Orca took hold of the door but couldn't open it. I can do it, Izuku said and pushed past the hero. His arms shifted into claws, and tendrils snaked out of his shoulders to help. The sides of the door where he gripped it bent inwards, and the tendrils did the same by helping Izuku tear the door off its hinges to get access to the driver. Izuku tossed the door to the side without care, and Gang Orca motioned the civilians to move away for the arriving paramedics to pull the man out. The hero motioned Izuku to help with the others trapped in the pileup. Izuku did so and went around moving cars out of the way by hand while others went for the victims. One particular bad car was crumpled with a woman stuck with no way out. They were planning to wait for the fire department to bring out the jaws of life. Izuku brought his own and moved to help the woman get out. The only visible part of the car was the roof since it was in the middle of the pileup. For cars were perfectly on top of the one to trap the woman inside with no way out. He could hear her crying inside the car through the roof. "Hello? My name is Hunter. Can you get away from the roof? I'm gonna cut it open." He tapped on the roof to signify where he was going to start. Yes. Please help." The voice was muffled, but Izuku could hear her easily. One hand shifted into a large blade, and Izuku swung it at the edge of the roof. It sliced open like butter, and he moved to cut twice more after tapping where he was going to cut for the benefit of the woman. His hand shifted back into claws, and the hunter jammed his fingers in the first opening and pried the roof like a tin can. Metal screeched, and the inside was visible. One of Izuku's hands shifted to normal, and he helped the crying woman out. "Hello!" Izuku smiled down at her with his hand outstretched. "You're being rescued." The woman took his hand and pulled herself out and embraced Izuku in a hug. "Thank you," she sobbed. Izuku patted the woman on the back and carried her to the ground for the paramedics. A crowd had grown slowly, and they cheered for Izuku's actions. He looked up from helping the woman to the cheering people. Izuku tentatively waved with a smile. They cheered louder, and Izuku felt a blush rise at the amount of praise. He moved to help with another car instead of staying. Izuku found Gang Orca helping pull out another man from the wreckage. "I think that's everyone. I already checked every car," Izuku said behind Gang. "I believe you are correct. Wonderful job." Gang Orca ruffled Izuku's hair with a smile. Izuku followed the hero to talk to the police to report what had happened. The feral boy listened to what the hero said, but didn't understand much of what he was saying. There were too many technical terms he didn't know. When he finished, Gang Orca made to leave, but he was stopped by a camera crew waving at him. The hero was wary of talking to the news with his feral intern with him. He was sure Izuku wouldn't do anything bad, but the boy hasn't learned the ways of moving around a reporter's nosy questions. Izuku followed along like a duckling and curiously watched the woman with the microphone brush her hair to the side and signal the guy holding the camera. Izuku saw he was aiming it at Gang Orca and stepped to the side, out of the shot. He waved at Izuku, and he misinterpreted it as to move farther away. He did so. "Gang Orca, what do you have to tell us about what we see here today?" The woman held the microphone to him. "From what I was told, a simple accident caused a car pileup. So far, there have been no fatalities at the scene," he said simply. "That's great to hear. And could you tell us who helped you at the scene?" The camera panned over to Izuku, who was shifting side to side like a child bored. He stopped when the camera was aimed at him, and attention was on him. He had no clue what to do. "Ah yes, this is my intern, Hunter. He will be working with me for the rest of the week before he returns to school to continue his education and training to become a hero," Gang Orca said, trying not to give out any personal information. Izuku looked between the camera and the hero for guidance. "Hunter? That's an interesting name. How did you come up with it?" The reporter held the microphone to Izuku's face. He stared at it and then at the woman. Because I like to hunt, and I'm good at it," he explained. "Why did you decide to become a hero?" "Oh, one day, Shinso said he wanted to be one, and I didn't know what else to do. So, instead of staying in my den, I tried out the exam, and now I'm learning to be a hero," Izuku beamed. The two from the news were surprised at his attitude, but the reporter furrowed her brows at one part. "Den? What do you mean?" "My old den." Izuku was cut off by Gang Orca's hand covering his face. "Pardon us, we need to continue with our route. Have a good..." "Did you just lick my hand? That's gross, pup." Gang Orca wiped his hand on his suit. "Not a pup." Izuku pouted and skipped along with his mentor. When they were far enough, he asked, "Why did you stop me? You shouldn't tell strangers everything about yourself. Most especially when those strangers will tell everyone else." The hero explained, "But I don't care who knows. It's just something that happened." Izuku shrugged. Gang Orca hummed in thought. "Still, it's not bad. But it's still something you shouldn't spread willy-nilly." "Okay, I won't." They walked a few steps, and then Izuku spoke again. "I'm hungry. Can we find something to eat?" "I'm quite hungry myself. Let's see what we find." The two began to scan and smell for their next meal. After their large meal, the day continued with the two patrolling the area. Izuku helped a cat down from a tree by climbing it like a cat himself. The old woman was very grateful to the feral boy and was prized with a hard candy that he bit into immediately, not knowing what it was. Gang Orca stopped and let a gaggle of children swarm him near a park as Izuku play wrestled with a few of the animal-quirked kids. When it was time to go, Izuku stood up from under a pile of children with ease, causing most of them to tumble off and laugh. He plucked one girl holding onto his horns and riding his shoulders off of himself and set her down with the others. Time for me to go. Now shoo, pups. Izuku waved them away with a smile. You're a pup, the girl that was on his shoulders said and pointed at him with her feathers puffed out. She ran off with the other children with a giggle. Izuku joined Gang Orca again and he waved at all the children and some of the parents. He was beaming the whole while they left. Gang Orca eyed him and chuckled. You're very good with children, the hero stated. Are you interested in having some of your own someday? He tried to tease his intern. Ido. At least 3. Izuku nodded decisively. He hummed and said, I should ask Mina about that. The hero smiled at the boy. How about saving that question for an appropriate time or until you two have matured more? He patted the boy's head. Izuku nodded. All right, they walked for a while longer as the sun began to set. It was getting close to dark and they were headed back to the agency for the day. As they walked, Izuku noticed a store window with a TV playing the news. He stopped and watched for a moment. Hey, Gong. What do we do if one city gets attacked? Do we stay or go and help? Izuku asked. What are you talking about? He turned to see the feral boy pointing at the TV and the news report of Hosu being attacked. That's not good. His brows furrowed in concern. They watched for a bit longer and Izuku recognized the thing attacking. That's a Nomu, like at the USJ, but it looks different. The hero pulled out his phone and made a call. He asked the other person on the line for any information on what was happening in Hosu. He didn't get much and was disgruntled as he hung up. There's limited information at the moment. As for your first question, we stay where we are for the time being. If they call for backup, I would go, or if they call for me specifically for some reason. It would be doubtful that they will call us since Hosu is quite far away from here. Izuku nodded and watched the news as heroes fought back against the Nomu and worked on putting out fires. He felt uneasy watching the chaos on the TV. He was brought out of his thoughts by Gang Orca motioning them to head back to the agency. After finishing up the paperwork with Gang Orca, Izuku headed off into the ocean for another smaller hunt. He dove into the water as his webbed fingers appeared and his legs merged to make a large tail fin. He sped through the water and found a small school of fish. He dove through the clump and tendrils speared many on his way through. He returned to the pool's edge and sat on it while munching on his after-dinner snack. He pulled out his phone to see if he could find a way to get the news on his phone. He gave up after 5 minutes and ended up getting information about the local karaoke bars. He didn't even know what that was. Izuku went to bed after chatting with his friends and saying goodnight to his mate. The morning after, Gang Orca informed him about the aftermath of Hosu. The Nomu were dealt with the help of the number 2 hero. There were many injured, but only one fatality at the hands of Stain, the hero killer. He took the opportunity of killing a small-time hero during the chaos of the attack. Is that villain strong? Izuku asked about Stain. The hero sighed and spoke. He is unknown. We don't know about his quirk, abilities, or why he is killing heroes. He attacks his targets while they are secluded and usually in alleyways. Like a hunter, but for people, a people hunter, Izuku said and hummed in thought. What does he hunt? You said it yourself, people. What kind of people? Are they good heroes? Bad heroes? Boys? Girls? The hero paused and thought about it. There might be a correlation between them. Izuku nodded. What does correlation mean? The hero smiled and explained the definition while getting up and heading to his office. Let's go see what the victims might have in common. Izuku followed his mentor and sat on the comfortable large couch that didn't make a sound as he set his whole weight behind it. He saw the many pictures in his office and got up to inspect them. Many of them were of him with other people the feral boy didn't recognize. The printer spun to life as it spewed out many leaves of paper with information about the victims of Stain. Izuku didn't know any of them, of course. He helped the hero separate the heroes by the city they died in and a timeline. On the surface, nothing was evident except none of the heroes were big figures in the industry. The main pattern Izuku and Gang Orca noticed was that Stain killed 3 in each city and moved on. There's not much to go on, the hero said. Maybe Stain didn't like that they were small-time heroes and just wanted to kill them for fun. Izuku shrugged. Or maybe he didn't like how they worked? What do you mean? The hero furrowed his brow. Like, maybe the heroes were bad at doing their job or doing bad things. You said you went to schools to tell pups not to do bad things. Maybe these guys didn't or something. The hero hummed and began to type away on his computer to pull up information about the heroes. The more that he looked, the more commonality was shown between the heroes. They all had minor scandals, bad dealing, or looked down upon for some reason or another. What's a scandal? Izuku asked with a tilt of his head. Stuff coming out about someone good and turns out they are bad. Like them stealing money or adult things. He said delicately, adult things? Oh, like sex and stuff. Yes, sex and stuff. He chuckled. That's what I'm going to call scandals from now on. Gang Orca gathered the information he discovered and made a report for the Hero Network to see. He attached his hero's name and who helped him make the discovery. He smiled at seeing his intern's name next to his and hit send. He was very proud of having discovered such a bright child. Gang, I didn't know you were a doctor. The feral child pointed at the hero's doctorate diploma on the wall. Chapter 23, Back to Classes. I'm going to miss you, Gang. Izuku hugged the big hero before he left for the train station. The hero was a bit flustered at being hugged in the middle of his lobby with everyone giving him sweet smiles to teasing smirks. He hugged the child back anyway. It's been a pleasure to have you around. If you need any help, remember you have a way to contact me. You'll always be welcomed back. Izuku let go and nodded. He waved at everyone else in the lobby before leaving out the doors. He looked around before pulling out his phone and setting the course for the station. Namuri stood waiting at the train station in her civilian clothes, waiting for Izuku to arrive. The train she had been waiting for came, and she looked around to find the feral child. She spotted him and squealed at seeing him. She grabbed him and pulled him into a hug. It's so nice to see you again. Izuku looked up from the embrace and beamed a smile at her. And what are these? She grabbed his head and looked at the horns. Horns. I grew them, Izuku said, letting her move his head around. I can see that. She gently touched them and thought about who else had horns. With a smirk. Was this because of Mina? She asked teasingly. I liked her horns and wanted my own. Nem smiled down at him. I think they suit you. Come on, let's go home. A couple of hours later, Izuku stretched in the dirt of his den. He made a sound of contentment at being back in his den. While it was nice to see a new place, he did miss his own space and furs. On the way back, he told Nem about his time with Gang Orca and what he had learned. She listened and asked questions about everything. Izuku was also happy to see Nem again. He had grown quite fond of her. He got up from his dirt floor and pulled out his latest trophy, the large shark's tooth. He smiled victoriously and set it next to the sports festival medal. After that, he went for a hunt. He shifted into his hunter form and prowled his territory for his prey. He leapt from tree to tree in search of a suitable lunch. His claws quietly thunked into the trunk of one tree and halted to watch the deer tilt its head to see if it could find what made the sound again. A few minutes of stillness later, they went back to grazing on the greens of the woods. The hunter ever so slowly got closer and closer until he was right above his prey without alerting them. In a flash, he dove at his prey and speared it through the heart to end it quickly. The deer cried in pain for a moment, but it was done. The hunter hummed in pleasure at the successful hunt and dressed the deer before bringing it back to his den to cook. Izuku happily skipped through the halls of UA to his classroom. He had missed his friends. He opened the door to 1A and greeted everyone inside. Kaken, your hair looks weird. He didn't notice the stares from his other classmates. Kaken, for his part, stared dumbly at his old friend. More specifically, he stared at the two horns on his head. The fuck is on your head? Don't say bad words, he admonished. What do you mean? He asked. What do you mean? What do I mean? The horns, he practically shouted at Izuku. They heard a squeal from the entrance and turned to see Mina sprint from the door to Izuku. She hugged him and then pulled his head down to see his horns. You grew horns? I did, Izuku beamed. They look so cool. Now we match. She pulled him into a side hug and pressed her cheek to his as she snapped a picture with her phone. Izuku beamed at her and soon after greeted Jairu and Shoji, who walked through the doors together. They both smiled in greeting and also complimented Izuku's horns. The rest of the class took their energy in stride and they went about their day. Shiro and Kaminari laughed at Kaken's combed hair, while Shinso came in with slow steps. The bags under his eyes were evident as he slumped into his desk. He greeted everyone without looking up. When he did finally focus his eyes, he stared incredulously at his friend. I was going to ask about the shark, but now I want to ask about the horns. Shark? Shiro asked nearby. I grew them myself, Izuku stated proudly. Jairu snorted a laugh and the feral child's response. As you do. Hold up. I'm with Shiro here. What about a shark? Kaminari asked. I hunted one, Izuku said excitedly. Most of the class was silent at his proclamation. What kind of shark? Kirishima asked. A big one. It almost took my arm off. Izuku tried to measure it out with his hands but couldn't. He sent a picture here. Jairu pulled her phone out and everyone crowded around Kirishima holding her phone. There were many cries of shock at the size of the animal and more laughter at seeing Gang Orca in a Hawaiian shirt gesturing at the sea predator. Izuku's beaming face took up half of the screen. That's a bull shark. How did you hunt a bull shark? Sato asked incredulously. It's massive too, Kirishima said in awe. I learned how to grow gills, Izuku said with a smile and showing off his neck opening up and gills appearing. They opened and closed a few times. After I learned how to do this, I swam around until I found that. He pointed at the phone. I baited it with my blood and then it bit me. Aizawa was standing at the doorway to the classroom and stared with dead eyes at the literal feral child telling his story about wrestling with a shark and taking bites out of it while his arm was still in its jaws. And then, Gang got some people to drag it to the kitchen to cook it up. It was nice. He smiled in remembering the taste of the shark. Most of the class was dumbfounded at the absurdity of their small classmate hunting down a shark and fighting it to death. Did it taste good? Kaminari asked first. Many of the guys nodded their heads in agreement with the question. Get to your seats, Aizawa finally said with such a defeated tone that the class worried for his mental health. I'm glad to see all of you are still alive. He looked at the feral child and he beamed back. Now, midterms are coming up in a few weeks. Start preparing. He walked out and Cementos walked in to start classes. The class lined up in front of All Might in Hero class. Great to see you all again. For today, we are doing a race to the civilian. I am playing the civilian and groups of 5 will race to where I wait for my rescuers. Keep collateral damage to a minimum. He stared at Kaken. Trying to say something, All Might? The blonde challenged. Izuku hopped from paw to paw in excitement at racing his classmates. He waited in anticipation as All Might leapt away to a distant tower and the screen flashed with 5 names. The feral boy squealed in joy at being in the first group. He lined up with the others and waited to sprint. The others waiting for their turns were infected by Izuku's enthusiasm and also began to get excited. Go! All Might bellowed and Izuku was off with the concrete under his feet cracked from his departure. He dove forward and in midair, his body shifted. Groves were torn into the ground with each limb connecting with the ground. Izuku grinned with joy at having his hair blow back from the speed and the enjoyment of being in the lead, until Shiro swung at high speeds past him. Izuku cried in outrage and speed up to pass him. He climbed up pipes like he had been doing so for years and leapt from foothold to foothold without hesitation. His 4 eyes traced every path he could take in an instant. When there were no footholds, he made them. He clawed up the surface of the concrete wall to reach the number 1 hero to win. He heard the tape getting closer and Izuku pushed himself to place first. 2 tendrils shot out of his shoulders and yanked him up to All Might. He was met with All Might's grinning face and Izuku roared in triumph. He could hear his classmates cheer from the distance and he reveled in it. Damn, so close. Shiro pouted. No bad words. A dozen voices admonished Shiro from one mouth. No bad words. Shiro put up his hands in surrender and backed away with a smile at his classmate. Mina crawled over the ledge of the race and breathed in heavily from the exertion. Shuku, you left me behind. she pouted. Izuku shifted back with tearing flesh and breaking bones. She didn't even bat an eye as he tilted his head in confusion. But it was a race? She couldn't hold her pout and hugged Izuku for his adorable behavior. I know, just trying to tease you. Izuku beamed at the hug and sat down to wait for the others to arrive. Mina moved behind him and began to play with his hair. He could feel her untangle the messy hair and begin to braid it. He hummed in pleasure at the feeling and relaxed under her touch. He heard the last two arrive and All Might called forward the next group. Ida smiled at Izuku. He passed him and sat beside the feral boy. The first to arrive was Tokoyami with Yairuzo close behind him. Kaminari and Aoyama arrive at the same time with Kaminari breathing more easily than the flamboyant boy. Yayamomo, can you make me some hair ties? Mina asked the heiress. Sure. Her hand glowed and a dozen hair ties landed on Mina's outstretched hand. Thanks. Mina continued her work on her mate. Izuku extended a tendril with an eye at the end to see what she was doing, but Mina batted it away. No peeking. Izuku pouted. How many eyes can you make? Kaminari asked curiously. Izuku responded by opening a dozen eyes on one side of his face and all look at Kaminari. A lot. The smile only made Kaminari's pale face pale even further. That is terrifying, All Might said from the side. All the eyes swiveled to him and he grimaced slightly. Young Izuku, please stop. More eyes popped between the other eyes just for fun. You're grounded, the number one hero said. All the eyes closed. Grounded? What's that? As Mina chortled a laugh at both the question and All Might's grounding. How can you ground him? What's the punishment? Ida chopped his hands. All Might was a bit flustered at the question. Izuku never left the grounds and didn't have games to take away. He was distracted by Izuku on his phone. Nem. What does grounded mean? All Might said I was grounded. All Might looked around in a panic to see an escape and then leapt away to another location for the next group. Oh, he just jumped away, Izuku said to the phone. Mina and Kaminari cackled in laughter at seeing the number one hero run away. Yairuzo looked surprised at the sudden action of the hero and looked at Izuku hanging up the call. Does Miss Kayama scare All Might? She asked. I guess. But she's always nice to me. Except for that one time I turned off my phone. She was mad, Izuku said sullenly. All done. Mina patted Izuku's head. Izuku touched his hair and felt the braids. An eye extended from his neck to see the results. His eyes shone at the new hairstyle. Whoa, that's cool. Izuku beamed at his mate. She beamed in return and puffed her chest out proudly. The last group had just finished and All Might yelled to them. Now one last race. All at once. He leapt to the gate where they started. Go! Chaos erupted as the other group of 10 sabotaged each other to get ahead. Izuku's group was no different. The feral boy tried to leap off the platform to get ahead but tripped as Siro's tape bound his legs. He fell off the platform but caught himself with his claws digging into the walls. Izuku roared in a challenge and Siro cried in horror at what he had just done. Tendrils tore the tape apart and he leapt after the black-haired boy, frantically trying to get away from the beast on his heels. He tried to slow him down again by shooting tape behind him, but Izuku's tendrils slashed it apart. I'm sorry, Siro cried and yelped in fear as another roar came from Izuku's mouth. Izuku caught up to the tape slinger and grabbed him before throwing him back the way he had come. He saw him do cartwheels in the air for a moment before catching himself on his tape sloppily. The hunter laughed in pleasure and turned back around to win the race. He could hear explosions from the other group and he saw ice shoot forward. He moved trajectory to cross paths with them to slow them down as Siro had done to him. He saw them. Kaken blasted an ice pillar in midair with a feral smile. The smile was wiped off his face when Izuku bodily tackled his old friend in midair and threw him back. You son of a bitch! Kaken roared in the distance. Izuku cackled in joy and tore up the ground to throw at Todoroki to slow him. It worked and he sped up to win. He was getting close and had his eyes open to see behind him to see who was nearing him. It was Tokoyami with Dark Shadow propelling him forward. Izuku grinned a savage grin and focused on his presence to show predatory implications if he got closer. The bird-headed boy backed away immediately and Izuku turned his presence back to normal. He skidded to a stop next to All Might and roared his victory again. All Might patted Izuku's head with a laugh. One by one, the rest of the class arrived next to All Might and Izuku. Kaken didn't slow down and bodily tackled Izuku in return. The feral boy went with the impact and they rolled around on the ground until Izuku overpowered his old friend and pinned him. Kaken responded by biting into Izuku's arm and refusing to lose. The feral boy yelped and let the blonde get his arms around his head. "You little shit," Kaken growled. "Bad words." Izuku laughed under his arm. "All right, that's enough," All Might said, breaking the brotherly scene before him. "While I didn't expect the subverting actions, it showed spirit. Great job, everyone." He beamed before leaping away. Kaken still didn't let go of Izuku for his treachery and grabbed him by his horns. Izuku responded by kicking his friend's feet from under him and slipping out as he fell. Izuku cackled as he ran to the locker room to change. Kaken roared at the indignation and chased after him. "The fuck just happened?" Shinso asked, flabbergasted at the actions of the bomber. Mina pointed at Shiro. "He tripped up Zuku at the beginning and he chased him down to get revenge. I'm guessing he did the same to Kaken too." She giggled. "Shiro, what reason did you have to stoop so low?" Ida chopped his hands. "I wanted to win. And guys, you know no terror until Izuku is chasing you down in his other form." He looked haunted at the memory. "He had cute braids. Who did that?" Uraraka asked, ignoring Shiro's PTSD. "He did," Toru agreed. "Zuku was almost purring when I played with his hair." Mina squealed to the other girls as they made their way to their locker room. "Let's go before they destroy the locker room." Shoji chuckled. The class met back up in the classroom before they left for the day. Aizawa was glaring at the feral child with singed hair and a smile, and the blonde in front of him grumbling under his breath. There were a few scattered giggles, but they stopped when the teacher turned on the rest of the class. After a silent moment, he spoke. "Midterms are coming up. Prepared accordingly. There will be a practical and written exam. Those who pass will be able to attend a training camp during the break." The class broke out into chatter about what he had said. Izuku naturally had questions. "What are midterms? Are they like tests?" He asked no one in particular. "It's to make sure you are learning what we teach you," Aizawa drawled out. Izuku shrugged. "Makes sense." He understood what the concept of a training camp was by the individual words. Yairuzo stood excitedly and said to the class, "You all can join me at my home for study sessions." Many looked grateful and a few others refused, saying they studied alone. "Can I join?" Izuku asked, just as excited. "Of course." She paused and asked, "Where did you rank in the written entrance exam?" Izuku shrugged and turned to the teacher. "Zawa, where did I rank?" The teacher gave him a murderous glare and grit out, "Third, you brat." "Third?" Izuku turned back the impressed heiress. "Third? How the fuck did you place higher than me? You've been in a hole in the ground for a decade," Kaken bellowed. Izuku shrugged again with a smirk. "I'm just smarter than you." Kaken lunged at him, but Izuku dodged easily and dove out the open window with a cackle. Aizawa had had enough and walked out of the classroom. "I'm done." "Oh, he left his bag," Shinso said, picking up Izuku's bag. "Do you know where his den is?" Shiro asked, watching the feral boy disappear in the tree line. "I don't know if he would like it if we arrived at his doorstep unannounced." Ida stepped in. "Suku, you left your bag. Do you want the class to see your den?" Everyone turned to Mina on the phone with a smile. She beamed and hung up after a kiss to the microphone. "He said it's fine, let's go." Shinso was already walked out the door with his friend's bag in hand. Most of the class looked at each other and many of the boys eagerly followed to see where Izuku liked to sleep. Yairuzo followed quickly behind in curiosity about the class president's abode. Soon, everyone was following Shinso, Mina, Shoji, and Jairu through the woods to Izuku's territory, while the owner of the territory prowled over them in the trees for fun. Chapter 24. Relax and study. The class walked into the clearing with the large pond and the tree hanging over a part of it. There were many gasps of awe at the serene sight as the small group of friends showed them Izuku's home. "Suku, where are you?" Mina yelled out in a sing-song voice. "He's been following us since we entered the forest." Jairu said and pointed behind everyone. Everyone turned and some shrieked in fright at seeing their smallest classmate standing silently with a beaming smile. Kaminari was clutching his heart as Shiro held onto Sato, who was very amused. "Welcome. I'm happy to have you all visit." Izuku beamed and moved around them to show them his den. "You can go wherever you want, even inside my den if you want to see. I don't mind." Tendrils pulled the makeshift door to the side and pointed down. "Is it okay? It seems personal to go into your sleeping area." Yairuzo asked for everyone. "Yep, so long as you don't take anything, I'm fine with it. I'll be back with food." Izuku darted off before anyone could say anything, and they heard the faint sound of cracking bone and tearing flesh. Shinso sat down on a log and got comfortable while setting his bag to the side and Izuku's by his den. "Hope you guys are hungry. He's probably going to bring back a few deer at least." Kaken was one of the first ones to peek inside Izuku's den and jump down into it. He found the hole in the ground homey and could understand why his old friend preferred it to a room. He was joined by some others, also curious about where their feral classmates slept. Kaken moved to the wall lined with animal skulls and other trinkets. He immediately recognized it as his trophies had to admit to himself that it was pretty cool. Izuku returned in his hunter form with one deer on each shoulder. Most of his class looked on with a bit of surprise, but they went along with their classmate making dinner for them. A loud clap of the hands drew attention to Sato smiling with his uniform shirt off and his white tank top showing. "I haven't butchered anything ever since my uncle took me to his shop for the summer, but I still remember how to do so." He offered his help in preparing the meal. Izuku's smile grew more and he moved over to a large tree. A tendril extended and a javelin was jabbed into the tree trunk. He hung up one deer and set the other on the other side. He shifted back and held out a knife made of his steel-covered bones to Sato, and he nodded gratefully. Shinso whispered something to Yairuzo and she shrugged and produced 2 containers filled with salt and pepper. Izuku narrowed his eyes at his friend but went to prepare the fire. He set the bonfire alight quickly and then he built it up bigger. Nodding in satisfaction, he returned to the other deer. "I have to say, Izuku, this is a very nice home you have," Sue said, soaking in the sun and dipping her feet in the water of the pond. She looked completely content with Uraraka joining her at her side. "Yeah, bro, this is pretty awesome." Kirishima nodded along while he sat by the fire. "It is peaceful." Yairuzo smiled and looked around at the clearing. She turned back to making some utensils for them to use and plate. "By the way, how do you plan to cook that?" Izuku paused and looked at her and then the chopped-up deer. "Probably on skewers." He placed a deer leg on one and stuck it into the ground, for example. Shinso quickly moved to it and seasoned it. "Much better. Don't you give me that look," Shinso said as Izuku curled his lip at his friend. Yairuzo made a container for the pieces that Sato was cutting off and preparing them for the fire. Mina did the same for Izuku and helped him take parts of the deer and set them to cook. Meanwhile, most of the class relaxed in the clearing and chatted happily. Soon the aroma of cooked meat began to waft into the area and everyone's mouth began to water. Izuku beamed at seeing everyone enjoy the deer he had caught while talking between themselves. He took a leg of the deer and sat to eat with Mina plopping down to his side and enjoying her portion. She smiled warmly up at him and leaned on his side while watching everyone eat and share his territory. Kaminari leaned back with a full belly and said to everyone, "I don't know about you guys, but that was great." There were many sounds of agreement. "While I would like to enjoy this much longer, we should plan out the study sessions for the midterms," Yairuzo said, and Ida nodded with her as there were groans from many others. She chuckled and pulled out a pen and notebook from her bag and began to write down how many would join her at her home. Once it was getting close to the sun setting, everyone helped out to clean up after themselves and thank Izuku for his hospitality and the meal. The feral boy beamed brilliantly to them all and told them that they were welcome anytime. Mina was the only one to stay after everyone else had left to enjoy some time with her mate. "This is nice. It's a good home, Zuku," she while picking up his arm and putting it around her shoulder. "It is nice, I chose it myself," he said with pride. She giggled and relaxed at the peace of the moment. They stayed in companionable silence for a long moment until Mina's phone rang and she looked at the message from her mother. She sighed and got out from under his arm and got up. "It's time for me to go. Walk me out?" she asked, smiling down at him. Izuku returned the smile to his mate and helped her out of the forest and through the halls of UA. They chatted a little about the study group that will take place in Yairuzo's home later in the week and what her home would be like. Mina was the most excited to see the size of the home, and Izuku began to get curious himself. They reached the gates of the school and Mina turned to him with a slight blush. "It's only right to send me properly as your mate." Izuku nodded and agreed with her. "How do I do that?" He stopped nodding and asked. She giggled at his behavior. "With a hug." She wrapped her arms around his waist and Izuku returned it happily. She pulled away with more color on her cheeks. "And a kiss." She pecked him on the lips. She pulled away again to see his reaction, and she was pleased to see his slightly dazed expression. She giggled once more and turned to leave. "See you tomorrow." With a beaming smile, behind the second-floor windows, the staff watched the interaction between the two young mates. "Hot damn." She left him speechless. Snipe said with a guffaw and a hearty laugh. "It is quite nice to see young love." Small Mite said with a warm smile at the scene. "It's so heartwarming it could bring you to Nem." "Are you crying?" Present Mike asked, shocked. Between sobs she said, "He's growing up so fast." She continued to sob into her hands while Vlad King patted her shoulder, trying to comfort her, but he backed away when she spoke again. "That girl better not hurt him." She looked up again with narrowed eyes at the retreating form of Mina. The other staff reeled at the sudden change in her attitude and prayed for Mina Ashidos' safety, that she would indeed not hurt the boy they had all grown attached to in the short time they had known him. An hour later, Hitoshi Shinso was seated in the living room with his mother watching a movie. His phone rang and he looked at the screen with furrowed brows and some concern. His mother paused the movie after seeing his concern. "Who is it?" she asked with her own concern rising. "It's Izuku." "Well, answer. It might be important." She had been given the story of her son's mysterious friend that day. He came back with staff from UA. She had also broken down in tears after hearing his retelling and hugged her son tight at the mere idea of her son having to do what Izuku had done to survive. She still hasn't met with the boy, but she was excited for the day she will get to meet the boy that befriended her son. Hitoshi did so and immediately heard Izuku almost screaming through the phone speaker. "Shinso, is it normal to feel dizzy when a girl kisses you?" I asked Nem, but she just laughed and didn't answer my question. The brainwasher stared at his phone with an incredulous look, and then his eyes flickered to his mother, who had her hand slapped over her mouth, but he could see the smile hidden behind it. He stuttered out a response to his friend. I don't know. I've never kissed a girl before," he said with tinted cheeks. "Why are you calling me for this?" "I don't know. I was gonna call Kakin, but I figured to call you first." Hitoshi could hear the shrug in the other line. He sighed and rubbed his face with the other hand. "Should you be sharing this? It seems private to the two of you. Is this something I shouldn't talk about?" "I didn't know that. Alright, I won't tell anyone else." "Thanks." Shinso, the friend of the feral boy, looked at his phone with an exasperated look in his eyes. His mother burst out into giggles and then laughter. When she had calmed down and looked at her son, told him, "You should really invite him over for dinner now. I can't wait to meet him." Her eyes glimmered in amusement. "I'll ask after the midterms are done." He sighed with a smile. "Good. And when are you going to get a girlfriend of your own, MH?" she asked teasingly, and a wiggle of her eyebrows as she leaned in closer to her son. He pushed her face away. "When I feel like it," he said with a reddening face as he turned away from his cackling mother. The weekend that came had Izuku on a train headed to his classmate's home. He had his phone close at hand and reminded himself constantly of the name of the station he would need to get off to continue to his destination. The train came to a stop and he looked around as he walked off the busy station and then looked down at his phone and the indicator of his position. He followed the route indicated and began to walk and look around at the homes that seemed to change with each street. At first, the homes looked slightly bigger than Kakin's, but then they grew in size with each passing structure until Izuku couldn't classify them as homes anymore and instead territories. He daydreamed of one day having his territory as larger than the ones he passed. His phone chimed and he looked down to see that he arrived at his destination. He looked at the massive gates and the structure behind it. He was about to go and push them open when he heard a click of a speaker and he turned to see a black box to the side. "What business do you have?" A cold voice came from the speaker. "MH, I don't own any businesses," he said, confusion lacing his tone. "A joker? Then be on your way," the voice said curtly, and the box turned off. Izuku waited and then pushed the black button. Nothing happened, so he kept pushing it until he became annoyed at waiting and turned to the gate. Without having to shift anything, he leapt clear over the gate and began to make his way down the path to the front of the building. About a quarter way there, he heard multiple dogs barking aggressively. He turned to the sound and saw 4 large dogs, almost the size of wolves, charging at him with teeth bared. Izuku stared at the dogs and changed his presence to something less friendly. The dogs stopped barking immediately and began to trip over themselves to stop. When they did and got back up, they had their tails between their legs and whimpered softly. He had changed his presence to show predatory implications if they attacked him, and now he switched it to something akin to an elder to children. The dogs stopped whimpering and slowly got closer and sniffed at his legs. He smiled and knelt to pet the now placid dogs. He giggled when one licked his face and the other tried to push him over playfully. He turned at hearing the gate open and he saw a few of his classmates staring at him with bewildering looks. Uraraka, Jairu, and Ojiro got closer to him to talk. "Dude, what are you doing?" Jairu asked with a smile, but the smile fell away as the dogs got aggressive at the 3 and began to growl menacingly. The dogs began to whimper again and turned to Izuku. He growled similarly to the dogs and barked out, "They are my pack." The dogs walked behind Izuku with their tails between their legs and head down and then sat down. "Good." He nodded and then turned to his friends with a smile. The 3 looked shocked at what just transpired and Jairu spoke for the 3 of them. "What the fuck was that?" She motioned with her finger. "Don't say bad words. And I don't know, I jumped the gate, and these guys came at me. They're okay now." He shrugged. You're not supposed to jump the gate. The guy was supposed to buzz it open for you. Didn't he talk to you?" Jairu sounded incredulous as he stared at the dogs again with their heads raised but still seated behind Izuku's legs. "The guy asked if I owned a business and I told him I didn't, and then he just ignored me." Uraraka slapped her hand over her mouth to stave off the laughter bubbling up. Ojiro's lips quirked up at realizing what probably happened. Jairu sighed. "Just forget it. Let's go." She sounded defeated but couldn't contain her smile at her friend's antics. Izuku nodded and began to walk with the other 3 as the dogs trotted beside him. They reached the door and an unfamiliar man opened it with a dignified motion and stood at attention. But his poise dropped when he saw the extremely well-trained guard dogs walking beside the boy that was supposed to run him off by dogs. Before he could say anything, Yaoruzo walked in front of the flabbergasted man and greeted them with a beaming smile. "I'm so glad you are here," she said with her hands clasped together. She looked slightly down at the guard dogs and tilted her head in confusion. "Hi, Ruzo. This is a big territory you have. It needs more trees though," he greeted happily. Her smile came back in full force at the nickname. "I do agree, something similar to your pond would be nice. Come in. But, the dogs must stay outside," she said sheepishly. The others walked in and watched Izuku turn to the dogs by his side and spoke to them. "She is part of my pack too. Protect her. Now off you go." He pointed directly at Yairuzo's surprised face. The dogs gave out a low bark and then ran off to where they came from. Izuku nodded with satisfaction and turned to the 5 faces staring at him. "What?" he asked with a tilt of his head. "So many things." Jairu shook her head. "Since when can you talk to animals?" Uraraka asked. "How did they listen to you?" Yairuzo asked. "Pack?" the butler asked with furrowed brows. "I can't talk to animals, but I learned how to use my presence at Gang Orcas, and it's really neat. I used that and they listened to me." Then he turned to the old man with a suit. "Yep, I am the pack leader of my class," he said proudly. He means the class president, which is pretty similar to a pack dynamic in the wilderness now that I think about it. Yairuzo explained with a tilt of her head and looked into the distance. "Anyways, this way. The others are already here," she said, leading them with an excited smile. They walked through a few hallways with the newcomers looking around with awe at the home. She opened a large set of doors to show Kaminari, Mina, and Shiro chatting and seated at a large table. Mina bolted up and hugged Izuku with a blinding smile. He caught her and set her down with his smile just as bright. Soon everyone got situated and Yairuzo went around to see who needed help in what subjects. Izuku let his expertise in what he could. Since he didn't learn the standard way of doing things, he showed others his way of solving problems and ways to recall information. For some, it helped immensely, for others, not so much. One subject he could teach a class by himself was biology. Even Yairuzo sat down to make notes as Izuku made a diagram showing the human body and every system in it. He had a keen understanding of what did what and how it works thanks to his quirk. The week passed with everyone studying as much as they could for the midterms. Izuku was happy to help whoever came to him, and he frequently had visitors in his territory for help. It was nearing the day of the exams when Monoma approached Izuku's table at lunch. Izuku looked up from taking a large bite from his sandwich to see Monoma giving him a smirk. "You should take smaller bites, you'll choke one day. And nice horns." He bit down anyway and smiled victoriously as he chewed and swallowed. "Hey, Noma," he greeted brilliantly. "Thanks. I grew them myself," he said proudly, showing off his horns. He chuckled and he said to the table, "Came over here to give you a heads up about the practical exams. I overheard some upperclassmen say that it was robots like the entrance exam." Mina whooped in joy and Izuku deflated. "Robots, that's no fun," the feral boy whined. "Are you sure? That seems too easy, no?" Jairu asked skeptically. "I agree. I would imagine the staff giving us something more challenging than robots." Shoji nodded with Jairu. Monoma raised his hands in surrender. "It's what I've heard. Just wanted to let you guys know is all. We'll keep it in mind and tell the others." "Thanks, Noma." Izuku beamed up to his friend from his sister class. As he left, Izuku turned to his friends. "I hope it's not robots," he said hopefully. Chapter 25. Legally beating your teachers. Izuku stretched his back after finishing the last exam for the day that required him to stay in his seat. He set the laptop he had been using in his bag and stood up. He looked around at his pack and saw that he wasn't the only one relieved to be finished with the tests. The last test of the day is the one he is most excited about, the practical test. With an eager smile, he led everyone to the locker room to change into their suits. "You excited?" Kaminari asked while taking off his shirt. "I can't wait." Izuku beamed and quickly slipped on his shorts, hopping on one leg. "Izuku, my mom wants you to come over after the midterms. Do you want to?" Shinso asked. Internally, he was apprehensive since Izuku would be the first friend he would have invited over in a long time. But he was sure that his feral friend would be happy to come over. He was proven right by what he said. "Of course. I never got to talk to your mom when I saw her last time," he said happily. Shinso smiled and nodded. "I'll tell mom to have dinner for tonight." "How did you two meet, anyways?" Shiro asked. "He scared a couple of bullies off when I ran into his territory and I gave him some thank you food afterward," Shinso said, chuckling at the memory. Sato nodded. "That fits." They regrouped together and waited for someone to explain the exam to them. While waiting, Izuku was reminded of Asato and wondered how she was doing. He did talk to her once a week on the phone, but he still missed their interactions. Mina gave him the idea of taking a class picture and sending it to her. Izuku beamed at the idea and pulled out his phone. The class overheard what they were saying and was already crowing together. Izuku extended a tendril with his phone in the air and took the picture with everyone smiling. Mina helped him send the picture to everyone in his contacts list. From there, Mina sent it to the rest of the class. They were all happy about the picture. Izuku had gotten a response from Asato almost immediately with a paragraph about how happy she is to see him with friends. Everyone stopped when their pack leader faced down the hallway. His smile grew and he hopped from foot to foot. Around the corner came Aizawa with the rest of the staff. Nizu popped out of his scarf and greeted everyone. "Hello, everyone. We decided to do something a bit different for your practical exam," he said cheerfully. "We get to fight you guys?" Izuku blurted out. Everyone turned to him and Nizu laughed. "Very astute, Izuku. Yes, for your practical exams, you will be fighting one of your teachers, paired off with another classmate," he said while throwing his arms up in the air. Izuku squealed with glee while some of the class groaned. The green-haired boy pointed directly at Aizawa with a feral smile. "I want to fight you. In the woods," he almost demanded. Eraserhead's quirk activated and glared at Izuku. "Quiet, you won't get to choose. The pairing has already been decided upon." Izuku pouted and Nem giggled at his face. Mina hooked her arm with his and patted it. "Don't worry, Izuku. One day you'll get your chance." The pairing was announced until it was just Kaken and Izuku left with no more staff left to choose.
Jeuf Aboj.
"We get to fight all of you?" There was a booming laugh and All Might landed before the class. "No, you will be fighting me," he said with some menacing inclinations. Izuku shook Kaken's shoulders. "Kaken, we get to fight All Might," he said with glee. The blonde batted his hands away. "I can fucking hear just fine." Izuku pinched his arm and he jerked away while rubbing at the spot. "Stop saying bad words." Kaken looked indignantly at his old friend. "You little shit. Don't pinch me. What are you? 5? The blonde lunged at him to get his revenge and Izuku dodged easily with a grin. Everyone watched for a moment as they roughhoused around until Nizu got everyone's attention again. "Now, let's begin." Everyone was split off to go fight their teachers and All Might grabbed the scruff of the neck of the two on the ground to pull them away. Kaken twisted around like a feral animal as the number 1 hero laughed. Izuku just let himself get dragged away with a laugh. Mina split off from Kaminari and pecked Izuku on the cheek. "Good luck." She smiled sweetly at him as he was dragged away by the symbol of peace. Izuku beamed at her. "Good luck." The three boarded the bus and headed to their arena for their exam. Izuku sat next to Kaken and eyed All Might suspiciously at the front of the bus. "He is super strong, right?" he asked his old friend. Kaken nodded with pursed lips. "He is strong, fast, and super durable. Like, how strong? He could level a few city blocks with one punch if he truly wanted. Think of that Nomu you took down at the USJ like that, maybe more," he explained. Izuku hummed in thought and stared at the back of the hero's head. The hero's smile strained as he felt the predatory gaze of his student. "He has a smell of fresh blood from his side. An old injury that never healed right, I'm guessing. His face is still a weakness. His eyes, nose, and ears could distract him if we go for them," he thought out loud. Kaken snapped his eyes into Izuku. "Injury? I've never heard of him getting hurt, much less something as serious," he said with furrowed brows. Izuku shrugged. "That's what I smell." The bus came to a stop and everyone got off in front of a faux city. All Might stretched for a moment and then gave them a salute before bounding into the distance. Izuku did the same by stretching his muscles underneath his skin. They wriggled around like snakes and then he sighed in relief. Kaken stared at him with his mouth slightly open and his brows furrowed at the scene before him. He shook his head and focused on the city before them. "I want to beat him," Kaken said. Izuku beamed at his friend and nodded. "Then let's beat him." He pumped his fist like he had seen others do. Kaken smiled at his old friend and nodded. "I can blind him with a flashbang. After that, we can continue to overwhelm him with attacks." The buzzer went off to signal the start of the exam. Izuku turned to the center of the city and began to jog with Kaken. His ears picked up a sound and his hawk-like eyes saw the wave of destruction coming their way. He yanked Kaken behind him with tendrils and keratin shields formed from each arm. He made a wedge and slammed it into the ground while carapace-like legs shot out behind him to hold him steady. The wave of wind and debris hit and washed around them. When it dies down, Izuku peeked with an eye that opened on the exterior of the shield. He absorbed the mass and stood before the devastation of what All Might wrought. They heard a booming laugh. "Why would a villain care for collateral damage?" Izuku nodded. "That makes sense." He turned to Kaken and grinned. "Let's go." Kaken's grin was just as feral, and he blasted along Izuku as he shifted into his hunter form. The hunter got on all fours with claws that dug furrows into the ground with each step. Izuku added some modifications to his body by growing spines like a porcupine and a whip-like tail with a spear tip. "Throw me," Kaken bellowed. Izuku didn't hesitate and grabbed his friend by the waist with a tendril that extended from his hand. He twisted in midair and the tendril whipped Kaken at breakneck speed at the hero. With a bestial roar, 3 streaks shot past Kaken to impact All Might, who shielded his body with his arms. The javelins collided with the hero with a jarring force that caused him to step back and wince at the pain of the tips digging into his flesh. When he lowered his arms to engage with Kaken, he was blinded by a bright flash directly into his face. All Might reeled back in pain and clutched at his eyes as Kaken blasted over the hero's head and got on his other side to send a barrage of explosions at him. Izuku leapt with all his might and collided with the hero, causing him to stumble at the dense high-speed body slam. Izuku didn't let go and dug his claw into his shoulder to hold on, while his other hand shifted into a heavy spiked fist. He got off a few punches in his face before All Might blindly grabbed Izuku's hand and threw him into a building. He broke through the first brick wall and the second. Kaken was backhanded away the next moment and was sent sprawling across the asphalt. He skipped across it and righted himself before All Might leapt towards his general direction. Still half blind, Izuku pulled himself out of the rubble and hissed in pain at the cuts. They closed up quickly and the glass was ejected from his body. He sprinted through the holes he created and redirected himself toward the fight. Kaken was dodging around All Might, who was slowly recovering from the first attack. Izuku came barreling in with his arm outstretched and became something he hadn't used in combat yet. The claw reeled back and hit All Might on his injured side. The sound was deafening as the mantis shrimp claw impacted with tremendous force, causing All Might to be launched into a building just like he had done to Izuku. The hunter roared in triumph and slammed his claw into the ground, caught up in the moment. Kaken looked between Izuku and the hole All Might went through before shaking himself and focusing on the battle. He aimed his gauntlet at the still intact building that All Might was still recovering inside of and pulled the pin. The large explosion ripped out of his gauntlet and destroyed what was left of the structural supports, causing it to collapse on top of the symbol of peace. The 2 students stared at the rubble of the building and the dust settling down. They looked at each other and then back at the rubble. Izuku was about to speak when the rubble shifted and All Might stood from the debris. Izuku pulled back his arm for another javelin throw but stopped when All Might raised his free hand. The other clutched at his side. "That's enough, I surrender," the hero said and sat down on the curb. The buzzer went off and exclaimed that they had passed. Izuku shifted back and ran up to All Might with worry. "Are you all right?" He looked between his bleeding side and his coughing up blood. Kaken stared at the number 1 hero in some fear. "You're really hurt," he stated. All Might looked up at the other student with a stained smile. "Keep this to yourself." With a puff of smoke, Toshinori Yagi sat where All Might once did. Kaken stepped back in shock and then looked to Izuku, who didn't seem fazed. "What's going on? His quirk makes him All Might." Izuku shrugged in explanation. "But how?" Kaken still looked confused and conflicted by seeing the strongest hero shrink down to an emaciated man. Yagi chuckled and waved him off. "It's all right, young Izuku is right. My quirk allowed me to become the symbol of peace. But in my old age, it's coming to an end. This injury isn't helping either." "Oh," Kaken said quietly. "Don't worry so much, young Bakugo. The reason I chose to become a teacher is to guide the next generation of heroes to the best of my abilities. And these old bones still have a few good miles left." He smiled brilliantly and flexed his thinner arm. "I guess that would make sense." Kaken combed his hair back and sighed at the revelation. "You've been a hero for 40-odd years. It's time for a new symbol to rise." He nodded sagely. "What are you doing, young Izuku?" he asked the feral boy whose fingers were reaching towards his hair. Izuku didn't say anything and grabbed a tuft of his dangling hair and snipped it off with blades that emerged from his fingers. He held the small tuft of blonde hair in the air, and then a bone clasp tied it together at the cut end to keep it from falling apart. "Perfect," he said, holding his newest trophy. Kaken stared at his friend with just a little bit of horror. Yagi was staring with his eyebrows raised. "What the fuck, Izuku? You can't just take a clipping of his hair like some psycho?" He looked at the now uneven hair tufts on the number 1 hero's head. "He can grow it back. It's my trophy," Izuku said defensively and crouched down to run. Yagi chuckled heartily and waved them down. "It's quite all right, he earned it." At that moment, Recovery Girl rolled up in a golf cart specialized for first aid. "You don't know when to hold back, do you? Any of you?" she said with anger lacing her tone. It's not their fault. I pushed them to their limits. Yagi defended them. It's the number fucking one hero. Why the hell would I have held back? Kaken said with crossed arms. I still don't like you, Izuku said, narrowing his eyes on her. Recovery Girl shook her head at all of them and helped Yagi onto the cart and the stretcher behind it. How are you two doing? Injuries? A few, Kaken said, looking down at his road-burned arms. I don't need your help, Izuku said with his arms crossed. Kaken stared at him with furrowed brows. What? She called me idiotic and hit me, he said defensively. Kaken rolled his eyes and got a healing kiss from her and boarded the cart. Izuku declined the ride since his weight would have slowed the vehicle too much. He instead ran beside the cart to the main building of UA. The two arrived back at the classroom in their uniforms to see some of their classmates already there and waiting. Izuku went over to Mina when he saw her looking down at her desk. Izuku quietly went to her and tapped her horn to get her attention. She covered her horn with her hand and looked up to see Izuku smiling softly at her. She pouted but smiled back anyways. You looked sad. Did something happen? Izuku asked, sitting down on the ground since his desk only can hold his weight. Mina sighed and sat with him, their backs against the wall. We failed our exam. Nizu was just too good and we didn't even get a chance. She dropped her head on his shoulder. Izuku comforted her by hugging her. I'm sure it'll be fine. Just because you failed once doesn't mean you didn't learn anything. And that's the point of school, right? To learn stuff and things, he said softly. Mina gave a watery giggle and looked up with teary eyes. But her smile was evident. Right? I'll do better next time. Thank you, Izuku. After wiping her face, she wrapped her arms around his chest and squeezed as much as she could. Izuku stayed next to her as more of his classmates came in after their practical exam was done. He hummed in pleasure at feeling his mate close to him and his pack around him. Mina looked up at him curiously but didn't ask anything, knowing he had his odd quirks. When everyone had arrived from their exams, Aizawa strolled in and told them to go home. Everyone did so, and Izuku walked with Mina and his friends to the train station. They chatted about their fights and how it went for them. Izuku listened to them all and excitedly told them about his fight with the number one hero. And then, he surrendered after digging himself out of the rubble. I think he could have kept on going if he wanted, though. But look! Izuku held up the newest trophy. They all stopped and stared at the small tuft of hair in confusion. Shinso was the first to realize what he was looking at. Izuku, you didn't, he asked, already knowing the answer. No, Jairu exclaimed in shock. Is that All Might's hair? She whispered loudly to not draw attention. Mina burst out laughing and hung off her mate's shoulders. Suku. She laughed some more. Shoji chuckled softly and shook his head. I can't wait to see if he left it like that or clipped the other side to even it out. Izuku continued their walk to the train station to see them off. One after another, they boarded their train and left Izuku and Mina alone. She kissed his cheek goodbye and boarded her train with a wave. He smiled warmly at her and watched her go. Then he turned back to the streets and was immediately lost. He nervously looked around, but he resigned himself to taking out his phone and inputting the direction back to his den. For the rest of the walk, he grumbled about how the city was loud and all the smells mixed, which blocked his sense of smell. Chapter 26. More dinners and chats. The weekend after the midterms arrived and Izuku was invited to Shinso's home for dinner. He was excited to go see how his friend lived and what his mother was like. But before that, he decided to stop by Ashidos' library to say hello. While they did talk on the phone, he did miss seeing her in person. On the train, Izuku watched his phone carefully to see which stop he was supposed to get off at. He faintly remembered seeing some buildings as they passed from leaving the woods fully when he took the entrance exams. He got off the train and began following the indicator to Asato's library. He had decided to visit her first before going to Shinso's home. Once he got close, he could remember the area fairly well and put his phone away. He saw the library down the street and excitedly jogged to the front door. He opened the doors quietly as he had done 100 times before and walked in. Asato looked up from her desk to greet whoever came in and smiled brilliantly at seeing who it was. Izuku, how wonderful to see you, she said softly and rounded the desk to hug him. Nice to see you too. Izuku hugged her back. She pulled him an arm's length away to get a good look at him. You haven't grown much, but those horns are new. Izuku beamed and tilted his head down slightly to show them off. I grew them myself. Asato laughed and examined them. Any particular reason why? Izuku nodded. I wanted to match with Mina. Plus, if I didn't like them, I could get rid of them. He shrugged. Ah, your girlfriend. You haven't done anything inappropriate, have you? She asked teasingly. Izuku tilted his head in confusion. Like what? Asato chuckled and pulled him over to sit down at his old table. Don't worry about it. She waved his concerns away. Fill me in. How have you been? She asked in a more motherly way. Izuku did so. He told her about his time at UA and how he had made all his friends. How the teacher treated him. He told her about meeting with his old friend and his family. They spent roughly an hour talking about their time since Izuku had joined UA. By the end of it, Izuku had left with a brilliant smile on his face. Instead of taking out his phone to find Shinso's home, he followed the well-trodden route to his old den. He found it easily and from there made his way to Shinso's backyard. He knocked on the front door and waited. He could hear some footsteps on the other side. Shinso opened the door and smiled tiredly at his friend. Come on in. Hi, Shinso. Izuku beamed happily. He walked in after wiping his paws on the entrance rug. He followed Shinso to the living room and sat down on the ground to save the furniture from destruction. His friend frowned for a moment at seeing why he did such a thing and remember why. He followed suit and sat on the ground with him. They talked for a bit about the upcoming camping trip and what they would need for supplies. Shinso asked how his relationship with Mina was going, and Izuku happily told him about their time hanging out after school. So, this is the feral boy that lived in my backyard for a few years? A woman's voice came from behind them. Izuku turned and smiled brilliantly at seeing the mother of his friend. Yep, that's me. I'm Izuku. He greeted her while standing up. The woman had straight light purple hair with a lean figure. She stood about the same height as her son. She smiled warmly at the boys and introduced herself. You can call me Karada. It's very nice to finally meet you. She pulled Izuku into a tight hug, much to her son's embarrassment. Izuku was surprised by the sudden embrace but smiled and returned the hug. You give nice hugs, he said as they pulled away. Karada laughed with delight. It's mostly my quirk. It allows me to emit a warm and welcoming aura. It's very helpful in my profession. What's your profession? Izuku asked with a tilt of his head. Child psychiatrist. I've been working with children for a long time, she said, looking at her son and combing his hair back. That's a job that helps kids with mental stuff, right? Izuku asked. Yep, they both said at the same time. Karada motioned them to the kitchen. Let's eat before the food gets cold. Toshi, set the table. Toshi, Izuku said, grinning at his friend's blushing face. Toshi grumbled with a reddened face and set the table from the three of them. Izuku walked over and helped him with some tendrils to speed up the process. Toshi didn't even bat an eye, but Karada stared for longer than would have been polite. Once the food was set in each place, they began to dig in while talking between bites of food. Izuku answered any questions Karada had without any reservations. He got a few laughs when she began to tell stories about Toshi's younger years. When they finished dinner, Izuku stuck around for a bit longer to chat as the sun began to lower. Karada offered Izuku to stay for the night, but he was more comfortable sleeping in his den. I'll walk you to the station to make sure you don't get lost, Toshi said. Karada gave Izuku a brief hug and smiled down at him. Come back anytime if you ever need anything or just to say hello. Izuku returned the smile and nodded. Bye, Karada. With that, the two left the home. The weekend passed and came Monday with the class anxiously waiting for their homeroom teacher to announce their grades on the midterms. It was quiet in the room as Aizawa walked in. He paused the intense gazes of his students but walked to his podium and looked over them all. Everyone passed the written exam and 4 of you failed the practical. You know who failed? But everyone gets to come to the camp anyways, he said before anyone's tears fell. The class cheered with the 4 that failed the most ecstatic. The glare Aizawa gave them shut them up and everyone quieted down in a flash. You 4 will have remedial course while the rest have fun. He finished with a malicious smirk. What? No, no and no. Mina cried with Kaminari looking dead-eyed out the window. You can do whatever you want for the rest of homeroom. Aizawa ignored the pleas from the two who had to face Nizu. His eyes landed on the feral boy by the window. Except for you, Izuku. Midnight and I would like a word. The class went quiet and Izuku looked around nervously at the sudden attention and the quiet. Aizawa let out a long-suffering sigh. You're not in trouble, now let's go. Izuku got up and quickly followed Aizawa out the door. He caught up to him and walked beside him. What's going on? It's about the camp, nothing bad. Just something you should know is all. He shrugged. Izuku nodded and the two made their way to the teacher's lounge where Nem stood up immediately after the door opened. She gave Izuku a warm smile and bade him follow into a private room with Aizawa next to him. He returned the smile as Nem waited for him at the open door to ruffle his hair. They all sat down and Izuku looked at the two in confusion. Now, I want to start this off by saying we do this every year. It's a tradition and we mean no ill will by doing it but with you. You might see it differently. Nem began. During the training camp, we load the class onto a bus and drive out into the location. The tradition is to stop in a certain location to stretch your legs, but it's more of a trap. Izuku listened intently but felt his stomach twist slightly. He didn't interrupt as she continued. From there, we have the students finish the rest of the trek on foot through the woods. She immediately grasped Izuku's hands when she saw the hurt in his eyes. We will not leave you, okay? I will not leave you as that woman did. It's a part of the training camp and a bit of fun. That's why we're telling you ahead of time so you don't get the wrong idea. You are not being abandoned, I promise. Izuku felt his throat close up at the memory of Inko doing such a thing and then his imagination making up Nem doing the same thing. You promise. I promise I will not ever leave you like that. You will always be welcomed into my arms. Nem rounded the coffee table and pulled him into a tight embrace. Izuku hugged her back and tried to calm himself. Aizawa looked down and away to give the two a sense of privacy. He was the one who brought up the issue that might crop up if they didn't inform Izuku about the tradition, and how that would affect the boy who was in a very similar situation before. The only time Izuku had voiced something he didn't like was when they first drove him to his old den for his things, and Aizawa would be remiss to forget such a detail. Once Izuku had calmed down, Aizawa told him about the area they would be training in. The site is somewhat removed from the city. It's a large forest compared to the area of your old den. Izuku looked over to the usually stoic man with red-rimmed eyes. Can I hunt in it? Nem chuckled and Aizawa let out an exasperated sigh. Most likely, but I'll ask just in case. Izuku nodded and sniffed once before using his quirk to free up his nose from snot. He turned to Aizawa when he spoke again. Namuri is right, we won't ever leave you like that. None of us, maybe all might, but I think it would have been more out of negligence than malice. He smirked at the end. Izuku chuckled at the joke and smiled with them. The three of them stayed for a bit longer to chat until Aizawa deemed that they wasted enough time and Izuku should head back to class. With another tight hug from Nem, Izuku left to join the rest of his class. When he opened the door, his classmates all looked straight at him with questions in their eyes. Izuku beamed at all of them and sat down for Cementos to continue the lesson. The day progressed without any issues and the lunch period started. What did you do? Toshi immediately asked when class ended. The rest of the class similarly were curious. Ida spoke before anyone could. It is a private affair between him and the staff, he said, chopping his hand. Izuku shook his head with a smile. It's nothing. Just Nem and Aizawa telling me something I should know. Is it bad? Mina asked with a furrowed brow. Not really, just a warning, I guess. He shrugged, and with that, they began to stream out of the class to head to lunch. The small group of friends sat together for lunch and chatted about the upcoming training camp and what they think they will get to do. Izuku listened intently as they told him about the usual things people did while camping, and he grew more excited as they talked about it. Granted, for him it was like any other day, but it would be spent with his friends and mate in the woods. The last class of the day ended and everyone began to pack to leave. But Mina and Hagakure thought up the idea of going group shopping for the supplies they would need for the camp. Yairuzo's eyes shone at the idea and took charge by organizing the day and time. Most everyone joined except for Todoroki, who visited his mother on the weekends, and Kaken, who began to decline the invitation but was stopped by Izuku's next action. "Aunt Suki? The class wants to do a shopping trip for the things we need for the camp, and Kaken is saying he will be busy this weekend." "Is he?" Everyone stared at Izuku with his phone to his ear. Kaken was the one who acted first by lunging at his old friend. Izuku jumped onto a desk to get away and ran away from Kaken, who was cursing at him. "Speaker? This button?" Izuku tapped the screen on his phone after his aunt asked him to. "Katsuki, you need to be more social. Don't you lie and say you're busy. You're going with your friends on the shopping trip and that's final," she said for everyone to hear. Kaken gritted his teeth and said through clenched teeth, "Fine, I will." He said the last part while glaring at Izuku, who was smiling a wide smile. "That's wonderful to hear. All right, I'll talk to you later, Zuku. Take care," Mitsuki said before hanging up. Mina was the first to burst out laughing, with the rest of the class hiding the chortle laugher behind their hands. Kaken's face grew slightly pink and then red as he threw himself at Izuku, who slipped on the desk while trying to get away. The papers that caused his paw to slip flew into the air and fluttered down. He came crashing down and Kaken landed on top of him. Toshi had his phone out and recorded the aggressive wrestling between the two. Mina's laughter doubled by seeing her mate slip in the most comical way she could have ever seen. Ida was trying to admonish the two on the ground for different reasons, while the rest of the class began to laugh more and more at the ridiculous scene. Izuku managed to slip out of Kaken's grip and climbed the wall to get away. He clung to the corner of the ceiling and sat there like a giant spider in its web. "You're coming. Aunt Suki said so. Get down here so I can kick your ass properly." Kaken roared over the laughter of his classmates. "Don't say bad words, Izuku. It's most improper to damage the wall of the school." Ida continued to lecture and point at the holes Izuku made with his claws climbing. "So then, everyone but Todoroki will be joining us at the mall," Yairuzo said, making a note. Kaken turned a glare at the heiress, and Izuku took that chance to skitter on the ceiling to the exit. "Oi!" But it was too late as Izuku swung down and out the classroom door and out of view. Suyu watched with her head tilted. "I didn't know he could stick to walls. That animal can't look at the holes he left behind," Toshi said, pointing at the wall and ceiling where there were many holes from where Izuku's claws dug into the surfaces. Once it was pointed out, the class noticed and then looked at each other. Kaminari grabbed his bag quickly and bolted out the door. "Last one out has to tell Aizawa." Everyone reacted quickly and scrambled out the door, many tripping over themselves not to be last. Suyu used her tongue to grab her bag from across the room, while Uraraka pushed herself off the walls and ceiling in zero gravity. Ida tried to stop them all from acting the way they did but failed. He and Yairuzo were the last in the room as everyone escaped. "Unbelievable. To think they are all striving to be heroes," Ida said, and then turned to Yairuzo. She cleared her throat and then stepped over the threshold of the classroom. Ida gave her the most unimpressed look he could give her. "I'm sure Aizawa will understand," she said as she looked away from his judging gaze. "I will see you this weekend at the mall." She left with a barely contained smile. Ida pinched the bridge of his nose and sighed. He resigned himself to telling Aizawa about the damages. As much as he likes his class president, Izuku could get a bit too feral at times. He still smiled as he remembered getting pulled aside by Izuku and talking him down from doing something incredibly dangerous and reckless. He only wished that he wasn't the last one in the classroom. Chapter 27. Shopping time. Izuku and Mina decided to hang out a bit before they headed to the mall to meet up with the others. The two mates were walking in the park with their arms linked together as they chatted. It was mostly Mina talking about her favorite show and excitedly explaining the plot of it to Izuku, who hasn't watched TV in over a decade. He listened attentively to her the whole time, even though he had little interest in watching the trash show, as she put it. "There are around 20 episodes per season, and how many seasons are there?" Izuku asked at some point. Mina hummed in thought and took a bite out of the frozen treat they were sharing. "I think 50? Izuku's eyebrows rose. "That's a lot." "Oh, that's nothing. I've seen some shows have over 100 seasons," Mina said with her mouth full of frozen yogurt. "Have you watched any TV lately?" He shook his head and took the spoon for a bite. "I like to read. Toshi has been telling me about comic books, and I want to check them out sometime. Manga too. We'll look in the mall when we go." She beamed up at him. He returned the smile in full force as they continued their walk through the park. Izuku was entirely lost as to where they were, so he was completely reliant on his mate to know where to go. It was getting close to the time to the mall, so they took their time to head over. It was a different mall from the one Nem took him to, so it would be a new area for him to explore. The two sat on a bench and waited for their classmates to arrive. The first to show up was Ida, of course, followed soon by Yaoruzo. Mina went to join the heiress and they talked animatedly, eager to go shopping. Ida approached Izuku with crossed arms and a displeased look. "Hey Ida, why do you look upset?" Izuku guessed the emotion on the tall boy's face with a tilt of his head. Ida sighed. "It's nothing. Aizawa was just displeased with the damage you left on the ceiling of the classroom." "Why would he be displeased? It would be Cementos who fixes things. Or Loader. The reason is because he is doing his best to teach us discipline in being a hero," Ida said with the chop of his arm. "His best?" Izuku cut him off before he continued his lecture. Ida froze and looked in deep thought. His hand went to his chin as he looked down as if he were trying to solve the world's problems at the moment. Is it his best? But then why would he sleep instead of teaching us? Ida walked away as he talked to himself. Izuku forgotten. For the feral boy, he shrugged and let Ida have his life crisis. Instead, he people-watched as he waited for the rest of his classmates to arrive. Bit by bit, they trickled in and joined him and the other three. Toshi sat with a yawn next to Izuku, a cup of black coffee in hand. "You drink too much of that." Izuku sniffed the aroma of the coffee in his hand. He had tried it once when Toshi had visited his den one weekend, but he didn't like the bitter taste of it. Although, the smell of coffee was one of his favorites. Partially a reason why Izuku liked Toshi so much. Also, he was Izuku's first friend in over a decade. "Bite me," he said in a monotone voice. "Wait, no, don't," he said almost in a panic when he heard Izuku's teeth sharpen. He was already leaning over Toshi as he tried to push his face away to avoid the clacking teeth. "I think that's everyone," Izuku said, stopping and looking over at Shoji, who just had arrived. He had been keeping track of everyone's scent, but it was difficult to do so in the city. He got off of Toshi and walked over to where everyone was grouping up. "Right then, it's best to stay in groups of at least 2. Yaoruzo began. "We can meet up at the food court in 2 hours. Everyone nodded along and Izuku looked around at the large mall with many people already walking around. "How do we find stuff on the list?" he asked. Mina hooked her arm with his and looked on with a beaming smile. "That's where I come in, and if you get lost, just call my number. You should have it on your phone," Yaoruzo said. "I do," Izuku asked, confused, and pulled his phone out to check. "You do?" Mina asked at the same time and looked over his shoulder. "Yes, he does. Miss Kayama gave me his number since she anticipated something like this to come up." "Ha! There it is," he said, pointing at the screen. "How the hell did he survive so long?" Kaken mumbled to himself. A finger jabbed into his nose. "Bad word," Izuku said, and Kaken slapped his hand away with a growl. "And no fighting." "Izuku, I'm sure Miss Kayama has told you the usual rules about being in public. No quirk use, no fighting, and such," Yaoruzo asked. Izuku looked off in the distance, trying to remember everything Nem had told him about being out in public. "I think so," he said with a scrunched-up face. "Look after him," Yaoruzo said to Mina, already knowing something would happen. "You got it." Mina beamed, giving her a thumbs up. $5 says that he will get kicked out," Kaminari whispered to the watching class. 10 says that he will get us all kicked out. 0 bet. 20 says the police will come after today due to him. Toshi sipped his coffee. "None of you have any shame." Jairu glared at all of them. 5 on him getting kicked out. They began to make a betting pool as to how the day will end. Everyone split up into groups to shop for what they needed. A few already had everything they needed and just tagged along. Shoji and Toshi split off while Jairu joined Kaminari, Shiro, and Kirishima. Izuku was dragged along as Mina pulled him from store to store as they bought what they needed. She had most of the supplies already, so it was an easy time for her. As for Izuku, he just followed along with his mate as she picked things and explained why he needed them. "Bug spray? What's that for?" "To ward off bugs from biting at you. Now that I think about it," How did you survive without it in the woods so long? She asked curiously. I ate them. She paused and stared at him incredulously. What? She asked as she thought she had heard wrong. Like those Venus flytraps but skin. I was super happy to have thought that up years ago, he said proudly. Mina opened her mouth to say something but shut it with a smile. That works, she said with a shrug. They continued shopping with Izuku's super credit card given to him by Nizu at the beginning of the school year. His concept of money was still very vague, which led him to buy more expensive things over the equivalent of cheaper versions. Mina sweated just a bit at seeing the price tags, but Izuku's smile, as he felt the sleeping bag's quality, put her worries at ease. Izuku was the one to carry a dozen bags in total. That included Mina's bags too. But his compressed muscles didn't protest at all. Mina stopped next to a bathroom and pointed at it. I'll be right back. Need to use the bathroom, she said with a sheepish smile. Izuku nodded and waited next to a bench. He looked around at all the unique people walking around the mall and smiled at the peaceful time. The smell of the city is what caused him to be grabbed from behind. He acted quickly as he felt the skin on his neck begin to flake and crumble to dust. The smell of who it was registered immediately. He whipped his head around the strong grip on his neck and met eyes with red angry ones under a black hoodie. For a split second, they stared at each other. One with his teeth bared and beginning to sharpen, and the other reaching his other hand to turn Izuku to dust. Izuku turned around and broke the grip of the villain and then bit viciously at the wrist. The villain screamed in pain, which caused everyone around them to panic at the scene. Izuku felt bones break under his teeth and the taste of blood not belonging to him on his tongue. He jerked his head away and tore off part of the villain's hand while grappling with the other. You bastard! The villain screamed into Izuku's bloodied face. His focus shifted to something over Izuku's shoulder, and he moved to put whoever was behind the feral boy and him. A stinging pain lanced through Izuku's back, and he howled in pain. He threw the bleeding villain away from himself to see another man running at him with two swords drawn. He acted instinctually and shifted his hands to razor claws while keeping an eye on the other villain. He roared a challenge at the other man and watched him carefully. Just my luck. I told you I would kill you, Stain said, charging at the other villain. Izuku swiped his clawed hands at the other man, and he deflected them with his sword. He didn't expect the immense strength and was pushed back, which caused his charge at the other villain to stop. As for the villain who tried to ambush Izuku, he was sinking into the ground with dark purple mist surrounding him. Izuku threw a javelin with a parasitic tip at the portal, but it was too late as the mall's ground was torn asunder from the bioweapon. His attention was drawn back to Stain as the dagger in Izuku's back was yanked out. He roared in pain and shifted his arm into a blade that swung behind him. Stain dodged back and licked the bloody blade. The hunter's body got ridged and he collapsed to the ground. You were not my target. For that I will dash, he cut off as Mina leapt on his back and rubbed her palms on his face with acid. He yelled in pain as the mild acid got into his eyes. He threw Mina off his back and slashed at her in midair. Mina cried in pain and Izuku yelled in fury. His ridged body gave under his command and he threw himself at Stain. With stilted movement, as if he were moving his body a muscle at a time, he tackled Stain away from his mate. Tendrils ripped out of his clothes and stabbed at Stain, who cut at them. Most were deflected, but a few found their mark as they stabbed into his flesh. Stain rolled away from the hunter with his swords at the ready. The hunter crouched low over Mina's prone body and growled animalistically at the villain. He looked over Mina's injury and saw it was a small cut on her bicep. His whole body had shifted already, with his teeth bared in the blood of the other villain and tendrils whipping around erratically in the air at his fury. I say again, you weren't my dash. Stain tried again. You hurt my mate. A dozen voices shouted at once, and the ground under him cracked as he launched himself at Stain with his claws aiming at his neck. Stain backpedaled at the ferocity of the attack. He blocked where he could, but the lashing tendrils cut at his exposed arms and legs. One sword was shattered as he brought it close to cutting at the hunter's face, but his teeth bit into the blade and broke it like glass. That's not to say Stain didn't get any hit on Izuku in return. Many knives stuck out of Izuku's body, but instead of slowing him down or killing him, he ignored them. When he tried to pull them out, it was like they were stuck in stone. Stain knew where to land hits, but the knives in the vital parts of the hunter didn't slow him down at all. The knife puncturing his liver didn't seep any blood like Stain expected, and the other two stuck in Izuku's leg and side didn't bother him. Finally, one devastating hit to his side caused Stain to be launched into a pillar where he smashed into it and collapsed with a wheeze. He glanced up to see what had hit him, and he saw a tail composed of bone ridges ending with a deadly spear tip. He coughed up blood as he tried to get back up, but the menacing growl caused him to look up at the hunter walking up to him on all four. The tendrils never stopped whipping through the air until now, when they all stopped and aimed at his vitals. The hunter grabbed Stain's arm as he tried one last attack with his sword. He squeezed, and the sword fell from limp fingers into a waiting tendril. The sword was brought to his back, and the hunter grabbed Stain's other arm to hold him aloft. "You hurt my mate," he growled in a dozen voices. "You got in the crossfire. That blade was meant for Tamura Shigaraki, but you got in the way." He wheezed. Izuku turned when he heard his name. "Izuku, I'm all right. It's okay," Mina said, getting to a seated position, and tried to smile reassuringly to him. His eyes softened at seeing her, but his anger grew when he saw the blood seeping through her hand clutching at her arm. "You hurt my mate." He put special emphasis on the last word as he snarled back at Stain's face as the tendrils whipped in agitation. The limb holding Stain split down the middle, one still holding Stain, and the two fingers turned into razor-sharp pincers that hovered right over his neck. He was stopped from any further actions when footsteps were heard, and he looked over to see Eraserhead and Nem running full tilt towards them. "Izuku, don't kill him," Nem shouted and got close to the three. "Let us take it from here, all right?" Izuku turned back to Stain and snarled in his face before throwing him roughly to the heroes. Eraserhead's scarf wrapped around Stain in midair, and Nem used her quirk to put him to sleep. Izuku ignored that and went over to his mate to see how she was doing. He shifted back to himself and crouched over Mina worriedly. He took what remained of his shirt, tore it into a makeshift bandage, and quickly wrapped it around her arm. Mina grabbed his face and smiled warmly up at him. "I'm all right, thanks, Izuku. I don't like to see you hurt," he said quietly. It was her turn to look worried. "Ah, Izuku, you have knives in your body." He looked confused and looked down to see 3 knives still stuck in him. He grabbed 2 in each hand and yanked them out with a growl. "Don't pull them out," 3 voices shouted in unison. The wounds closed almost immediately with no blood leakage. The last knife was pulled out from his stomach, and it clattered to the ground as Izuku scanned his internals for the damage to repair. It was simple enough with his knowledge of anatomy and biology. "Come on, let's get you looked at," Nem said behind Izuku. She looked over both her students and helped Mina up from the ground. Izuku was at his mate's side immediately and helped her to her feet. "Care to explain what happened?" Aizawa asked with a raised eyebrow. "Later, Sho. Let's get them to the medics." She looked down at Izuku and his bloodied state, but with no wounds, and then at Mina, whose arm stopped bleeding. Her eyes landed on the sword held by some tendrils on Izuku's back. She opened her mouth to talk about it, but then shut it when she remembered the trophies Izuku had collected over the years. She knew of the most recent trophies of the Nomu's knee brace and the medal from the sports festival. For now, she let him be, and they will talk about it later at the police station. The 4 and the captured villain were escorted to the exit, where a crowd was watching what was going on. Multiple police were holding the people back from getting too close, and other heroes were around and waiting to help with what was going on. The crowd got louder as they came out. Many shouts from their classmates who waited anxiously for the last 2. Izuku looked around and found his classmates all safe. He felt more relieved to see his pack together and unharmed. He met eyes with Ida and he shouted, "Hey Ida, I got Stain." He pointed at Stain, who was still unconscious in the scarf of a very annoyed man. Ida looked horrified and vindicated at seeing Stain bloodied and due to his class president. He gave a single nod in gratitude to Izuku, and he beamed as the crowd exploded into chatter at seeing Stain captured and what Izuku had said. In the crowd, Toshi shook his head at everything he was seeing. He turned to his classmates. "You guys owe me 20. Kaken smacked the back of his head. Izuku watched over his mate as the paramedics closed up the shallow cut on her arm with their quirks. He was checked over, but seeing that he had no wounds at all, he was let go. When the 2 finished, they headed over with Nem to the car where the UA staff members drove to get to the mall. She motioned them in and got behind the driving wheel. "Where are we going?" Izuku asked with his nervousness cropping up from being a passenger in a car again. Nem smiled, calming towards him. "To the police station so we can get a report of what had happened." She patted his head and began to drive. Mina dropped her head on his shoulder and they watched the mall disappear around a corner. After a few moments, Izuku spoke up again. "I forgot to grab the stuff we bought." Mina snorted loudly at that and Nem chuckled. Chapter 28. The Ashidos. Izuku and Mina rode in silence to the police station until the feral boy felt his side vibrate. Mina looked oddly at him and Izuku pulled his shirt up and his phone emerged from his abdomen. His mate gave him a flat look. He didn't understand the emotion and just smiled at her. He guessed it was the right thing to do since she smiled back. He checked his phone to see half a dozen messages from his friends asking him what had happened and if he was alright. He responded to them in the group chat Mina had shown him. "That one villain from the USJ, Shizaki, attacked me and I bit his hand off. Then Stain tried to kill Shizaki but hurt me and Mina. I beat him and now we are okay." He hit send and nodded in satisfaction. Mina snorted loudly at seeing his message typed out with a few tendrils. "His name is Shigaraki, not Shizaki." Nem swerved on the road upon hearing that and asked in alarm. "He attacked you? I was pretty sure his name was Shizaki," Izuku said with a scrunched up nose. "And yeah, he used his dust cork on my neck, but I bit most of his hand off. It's still probably at the mall," he said with a shrug. Nem pulled out her phone and called someone to explain what Izuku had just said. While she did that, Izuku received more messages from the group chat. Most of them were exclamations of alarm and more questions. He was beginning to get overwhelmed trying to respond to them all, but his mate came to his rescue and helped him by taking his phone and typing. They arrived at a station and they got out and walked together to a conference room after passing a few police officers who nodded to Nem in her uniform. A familiar man was waiting in the room already for them. Izuku stared at him for a moment, trying to remember where he met him before. Nem left for a moment and then came back with a new shirt for Izuku to wear instead of the one he had that was slashed all over. He took it and set it to the side to switch later. "Ah, you're that guy who asked me questions about Inko," Izuku said, pointing at him with a smile. The detective chuckled and nodded. "That I am. Good to see you again, Izuku. My name is Naomasa Tsukachi," he said with a bow to Mina and Nem. He motioned them to sit across from him. "Miss Kayama is here as a guardian for the two of you, so you guys can give out a statement of the events that happened today." He placed a recorder and hit start on the small device. "Mina Ashido, can you tell me what happened? From start to finish." Mina looked slightly nervous, but did so from her point of view from the start of the day to the point Eraserhead and midnight arrived. Tsukachi asked a few clarifying questions but kept track of each time his quirk registered as truth. He nodded and then turned to Izuku. "Izuku Kayama, please tell me what happened. From start to finish." Izuku looked confused since Mina just told him but shrugged and went along with it. "We were shopping. Mina went to the bathroom and I waited outside. Someone grabbed my neck from behind and felt my neck begin to dissolve, I guess, and I turned to see it was Shizaki. I bit most of his hand off and then Stain hit me with a knife. He said he was aiming at Shizaki, but I got in the way." He continued until he reached the point where he had Stain pinned to a pillar and the two heroes arrived. "To clarify, you said Shizaki. Did you mean Shigaraki Tamura? The same villain who attacked your class at the USJ?" he said with a slight smile. "It was the same villain from then, but I'm pretty sure I'm right," he said confidently. Nem and Mina both held in laughter at his surety. Tsukachi did the same and covered his smile with a cough. "All right, thank you for your cooperation. You are both clear from any vigilante actions since it was all in self-defense, but there is one thing we need to discuss." He turned his attention to Izuku. Izuku felt the attention of both adults on him and instinctively held his trophy closer to himself. "Mine," he said simply. The sword was sheathed in a coating of his bone to prevent it from cutting anything. It was short enough for it to be covered by his ragged shirt on his back. "Izuku, dear, you can't take evidence from a villain," Nem said gently. "But it's my trophy. I got it," he said petulantly like a child. "Still, it belongs to the police and it needed to be processed as evidence." Nem said with a pained expression. There is enough evidence at the mall. I broke the other one and there were like 20 knives on him, he said, pouting, knowing he was losing. Nem shook her head sadly.
I'm sorry, Izuku.
He tried to think of anything else he could argue with, but crossed his arms with a growl and produced half of a sword blade. He set it on the table with heavy reluctance and a longing look in his eye. A single tear wanted to escape from his eye at losing his trophy, but he sucked it back in. Mina patted his back and tried to comfort him by hugging him. I'm sorry, sweetie, Nem said, brushing his hair back. Izuku sniffed and nodded solemnly. I understand. For what's it's worth, you did a good job taking out Stain, Tsukachi said with a reassuring smile as he took the blade and put it in a cloth to put away. They finished up with Tsukachi and made to leave the station. The three were met by a few people. Aizawa was there waiting outside the police station and trying to appease a pink woman and a horned man with black eyes. Once they met eyes with Mina, they forgot about Aizawa and rushed over to his mate. He could already tell it was her parents from the resemblance and their scent. The woman had long pink hair tied in many places down to the middle of her back. She was a bit taller than Mina and just as lean as her daughter. Her father was as tall as the hero gang Orca. His horns were thicker than Mina's, but the same rough shape. Heya, Mom, Dad, Mina said weakly as she was almost picked up by their tackling hug. I'm all right. We could only think of the worst when we got the call. Her mother sobbed. She pulled her back and looked at her from top to bottom. She found the bloody sleeve of her t-shirt and examined the now closed-up wound. Well, you do look all right, her father said, calming down some. He looked around and caught Izuku's eyes and his horns. Oh ho? Who is the strapping young lad? His smile grew. Izuku looked between them all and was unsure how to greet the parents of his mate. Hello? He waved. Mina pulled away from her mother. She hooked her arm with Izuku's and pulled him forward slightly with a smile. I guess this is as good time as any. This is Izuku, she said with a beaming smile. Mina's mother's attitude switched in a moment from worried and crying to a light with glee. Izuku, I've heard so much about you. Come here and let me take a look at you. All right, you can call me Miwa and my husband, Dai. Dai also got close and looked Izuku up and down. His eyes were drawn to his horns since he had a pair of his own and liked to compare. Kinda short, don't you think? He was slapped in the arm by his daughter for that. So what? He beat Stain. She defended her mate. That shut them both up as their eyes locked onto Izuku's. That's the villain that attacked you? Miwa almost screamed at her daughter. You beat Stain? Did someone help you? Dai asked in surprise. I think Mina blinded him some with her quirk. Izuku shrugged. You what? Miwa asked, shocked. Let's move out of the way from the entrance of the station, Nem said gently and motioned to them to move. They moved to the side to allow others to move in and out of the station without having to go around the family. Yashushi watching the twins? Mina asked her parents. Miwa nodded and brushed the question aside. What is this about Stain, the hero killer, attacking? She questioned. It started when Mina went to the bathroom. Izuku began his legendary storytelling skills. Hold on. You are saying me going to the bathroom caused all of this? Mina interjected. That doesn't make sense. I'm just starting where it began is all. Izuku was confused as to why she would think that. Anyways, Mina went to the bathroom. Shizaki attacked me and I bit most of his hand off. Then Izuku scowled a little at being interrupted again. You bit whose hand off? Dai asked with raised brows. Shigaraki, the same villain that led the attack on the USJ, Nem explained. Shizaki cried for a bit, then I got stabbed in the back by Stain. He said something about getting in the way, then Shigaraki, right, Shinami. He nodded along with Mina as she pouted at his tease. Anyways, he got away and Mina blinded Stain. He hurt her, and then I beat him a lot, Izuku summarized. Miwa and Dai were both horrified at what they had heard and how easily he told the story of fighting a serial killer. Aizawa was more resigned as he listened to his feral student talk. However, he is glad that they are both safe. Well, that's a story. Dai held onto his daughter's shoulder to reassure himself that she was safe next to him. Dai looked down at Izuku and re-examined him from top to bottom. He took in the torn up and bloody shirt on him to the strong canine legs that held him up. What his eyes caught most of all were his eyes. They had a more animalistic element to them than most animal quirk users. Miwa approached Izuku and held his face tenderly between both hands. "Thank you for keeping my daughter safe," she said with tears in her eyes and a motherly smile. Izuku returned a beaming smile and a nod. "Of course, she's my mate." "What?" Miwa asked, confused and a little worried about what the two teens had been doing unsupervised. Most animalistic quirk holders call their significant other a mate without any of the other pretenses. A friend at work told me about that once, Dai said with a chuckle. Miwa's face relaxed some at hearing that and then turned to her usual self, now knowing her daughter was safe. "So, Izuku, I've been hearing a lot about you from Mina." Her arm was hooked with his in an instant and she had a teasing smile. "But she doesn't want to tell us much about some other things. Want to fill me in? I want to know what kind of man my daughter is pinning after." She giggled like a schoolgirl. "Ma!" Mina shouted in mortification at her actions. "I don't mind. What do you want to know?" Izuku asked happily. Miwa began to walk them to the small nearby park in front of the police station. Aizawa waved at Nem and left, not wanting to be a part of any more of whatever was going on. As for Nem, she smirked and tagged along with Dai and Mina to walk behind the two. "So tell me, my Na is a bit cagey about telling us about you and where you are from. What do you like to do in your free time?" Miwa began in earshot of the other three. "I'm from here, not sure where. I'm really bad with directions in the city," Izuku said, looking around. "But I like to read, go hunting and spend time with Mina," he said, beaming and looking back at Mina, who had a slight blush at him telling her parents so straightforward like that. Miwa was about to tease him about the last part but stopped. "Hunting?" she asked, confused. "Yeah, I really want to hunt a bear, but they don't live near here," Izuku said sullenly. "Most predator quirks enjoy hunting as a pastime," Dai said to help his wife. "Oh, I see. You go hunting often," Miwa went on. "Every night. Usually small stuff like badgers and rabbits for snacks. When I'm really hungry, I go for a deer." Izuku nodded. At that, even Dai looked confused and looked both at Nem and his daughter. They both looked like they already knew what he did daily. Nem caught his eye and just nodded for him to listen. He did so after seeing his daughter so calm. "Daily? Do you live near the woods?" Miwa asked. "In the woods. I made my den there. It's a bit bigger than my old one, I think." Izuku jerked to a stop when Miwa did. He looked at her confused. Miwa, for her part, looked to her husband to see if he had anything to say about people with animal quirks living in dens. He shook his head just as confused. She looked at her daughter and she just smiled and nodded to her mate. Miwa did so and then asked, "What do you mean? Do you live in a den? Like a wild animal?" She asked tentatively. "Do you not know?" Izuku turned to his mate in confusion. "Did you not tell them?" She shook her head. "I didn't think it was right for me to tell them something so personal. So I waited for you to meet them and tell them yourself. But I already told you I don't mind who knows." "Know what? What's going on?" Dai asked with furrowed brows. "You sure you don't mind if I tell them?" Mina asked and Izuku smiled as shook his head. "Well, alright then. Do you guys know the story of a child being raised by wolves in the wild? Well, that's Izuku, but the wolves tried to eat him instead," Mina said, motioning to a beaming Izuku. Everyone was quiet for a long moment as they looked between Mina and Izuku, waiting for the punchline. "Alright, what's the joke?" Dai asked. "Joke?" Izuku asked, confused. "Oh gods." Miwa covered her mouth. Izuku was abandoned in the woods by his mother when he was 5 and he survived on his own until he decided to come to the entrance exam and the staff found out about him and made him a ward of the school, Mina said solemnly, still saddened by the story. Miwa was crying as she looked at Izuku, who smiled gently at her. Dai was dazed at the story and had to look at Nem, who was also in a similar state as his daughter at the story. At first, he thought she was his mother, but the more he looked at her, he realized she was a hero in civilian clothes. Miwa's attitude switched in a flash. "That whore! Where is she? How could she do such a thing to her own child?" she asked in fury. Izuku was taken aback by the anger that was shown by the seemingly good-natured woman. By the looks of it, so were Mina and her father. "Oh, she's in jail," Nizu said she was arrested the day after the entrance exam. Good. I hope she rots. Dai approached his still weeping wife to calm her. He nodded to Izuku to signal that he didn't do anything wrong, and he moved Miwa to sit at a near bench. Mina took Izuku's hand in hers and smiled reassuringly at him. You should probably change shirts. That one is all bloody and kinda gross. Mina joked. Izuku looked down at his ruined shirt and nodded. He took it off and put on the one Nem had given him at the station. He felt a poke on his side where he had something hidden under his flesh. His eyes darted to Nem, who was near the two parents, explaining more fully about his situation, and then to his mate, whose brow were furrowed. Mina felt at his side. What is that? She asked with some concern. Nothing, he said too quickly and averted his eyes. Mina witnessed a new emotion from her mate as he tried to hide something for the first time. What are you hiding? Izuku looked away from her as she jumped in front of his line of sight. She watched him carefully and thought back to the police station. It clicked in her mind and she grinned from ear to ear at what he had done. Izuku's eyes flickered to Mina for a moment and saw her grinning face. What are you smiling about? He asked far too casually. You naughty boy. Mina whispered loudly at him. I have a pretty good idea what you have under there. I don't know what you're talking about. She giggled and took his arm in hers. Don't worry. I won't say anything, she said with a wink. Izuku's chest fluttered at her wink and he looked worriedly at his chest. He looked up again at his mate. You made my chest feel weird, he said bluntly. Mina furrowed her brow as she tried to understand what he had said, and then her face bloomed purple in a furious blush. She turned away from him to try and cool her face down and was met with her mother's teasing smile on the bench. Her father and Nem both had amused smiles on their faces. She covered her face with her hands and looked away again in embarrassment at being caught. Have you been reading romance novels? Mina asked in a wobbly voice. Romance? No, mostly research. Why? Izuku asked with a tilt of his head. The adults finished their conversation and walked over to the two. Miwa couldn't help herself. What's wrong, nah? Why is your face all purple? She had a teasing smile. Shut up, Mina said while looking away. What happened? Nem asked with a smirk. I told her she made my chest feel weird and then she got embarrassed, I guess? He said after a pause. Nem snorted loudly and looked away while Dai had his eyebrows almost touching his hairline. Miwa was holding in a burst of laughter after hearing what Izuku had said. Now that we know your history, it makes more sense now, Dai said. What makes more sense? Izuku asked. Your behavior. It's like everything is new to you because it is. You don't know the usual verbal cues and it's not bad, but it was odd before. And most especially your eyes. They looked wild. Dai explained. Izuku nodded along with the man. That makes sense. I think it's time to head on home now. I'm sure Yashushi is at his wit's end with the twins, Miwa said while smiling at them all. Who is that, Yashushi? Izuku asked. My oldest son, and the twins are my youngest. You'll meet them soon enough, Miwa said warmly. The group began to make their way to the station car where the Ashidos came in. The girls walked up ahead as Dai pulled Izuku back some. He looked at his mate's father with a tilt of his head. Dai spoke. What are your intentions with my daughter? He asked seriously. Intentions? I don't know what that means. Dai lost his role and explained like a father would. It means to plan or work to. He shook his head and got back into his role. What are your plans with my daughter in the future? He said even more seriously than before. Oh, I get it. She is my mate. I want to protect her and make her happy. I would say that I wouldn't ever let her get hurt, but we're planning to be heroes and they get hurt sometimes. But I will never hurt her and will hunt anything that does until they are under my claws. Izuku lost his childish tone and changed into something primal. His claws grew and in the setting sun, they glinted. His mind went back to Stain at his mercy. Dai looked surprised at the boy, but when he remembered what Namuri had told them about his history, he believed that Izuku would indeed hunt whoever hurt his mate. Thank you, he said finally and patted Izuku's shoulder. He beamed up at the tall man with his claws still outstretched. Of course, what's your quirk anyways? Dai asked. I can change my body at will, The blades are bone, which I've infused with carbon and iron to strengthen them. It's the equivalent of pure steel, and that's not all. Compressed muscle mass, strengthened tendons, added nerves, and some other things. He said jovially, "Damn, that's impressive." Dai said, getting close to the parked car with the girls chatting quietly next to it while looking between the two boys. Mina most especially was looking anxiously at them. He poked his arm. "You shouldn't say bad words," Izuku said to Dai, who was looking down at him. Dai smirked and nodded. "I'll try not to," he chuckled. The Ashidos moved to their car. Mina moved over to Izuku and gave him a tight hug and peck on the cheek. "I'll see you later. Thanks for protecting me." She smiled warmly at him before joining her parents in the car. Miwa waved at Izuku and Dai gave him a nod as they left. It was Nem and Izuku left on the sidewalk. Nem hugged his shoulder and smiled down at him. "Let's get going before it gets too dark." Izuku smiled and nodded. The two got into the car that drove them to the police station and got going. After a few minutes, Izuku asked, "What about the stuff we bought? I'll get some guys to pick it up from the mall." She smiled reassuringly. She gently brushed his ever-messy hair back from his forehead. "I'm glad you're okay." Izuku felt warmth in his chest at her actions and leaned into her hand. Nem giggled at his animalistic behavior and ruffled his hair before focusing back on the road back to UA. And that's a wrap, Legends. Another crazy episode in the bag. Big thanks to Big Teddy G3498 for teaming up with me on this project. Absolute legend. And a massive shout out to all of you for watching. Drop a like, hit that subscribe button, and let me know in the comments what other abilities you think would make Deku completely overpowered. Keep those theories coming, stay legendary, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace pout.